Hi everyone, I'm your host today, Kim Winter, Global CEO of Logistics Executive Group. Thanks for joining us for another engaging vodcast. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Logistics Executive TV, to make sure you don't miss any episodes. Today we've got a very special treat. We're being joined by the three amigos of the global air cargo scene. We've got Stan Wraight. Stan is the President and CEO of Strategic Aviation Solutions, and Stan is joining us today from over there in Montreal. He was previously CEO of Airbridge Cargo Airlines and prior to that with KLM. Welcome, Stan.
Thank you.
And we've also got Menen. Menen was for about 20 years the DSV for air cargo over at Emirates. So very well known in the Middle East and globally. Hey, Ram.
Hey, Kim. Good to be here.
We've also got Des Vertannes, former head of air cargo at Etihad, was with Gulf and with Menzies Aviation for quite a while as well. So we've been joined by these gentlemen today to talk about the air cargo world. Aviation world in particular has been one of the hardest hit by the current pandemic, one of the first hit, one of the hardest hit, and probably one of the toughest, longest organisations or longest industries to come out of this pandemic situation. So we're going to talk about a number of things today. We're going to really look to try and focus on moving forward in terms of the industry and in terms of aviation and air cargo in particular. So, Des, welcome. I didn't allow you to say hi. How are you, Des? You're over in, where are you today?
I'm in the Algarve in Portugal, Kim, so it's great to be joining my other two amigos.
Very good. And
good to see
excellent.
you as well.
Ram, where are you based?
Kim, I'm in Luxembourg.
You're in Luxembourg.
Enjoying some good weather here.
So thanks again, gentlemen. So jumping straight into it today, I mean, we've seen what's going on in the industry, plenty of news about it, as plenty of media coverage. Really just but let's just get a quick heads up from each of you as to the current state, particularly air cargo globally. Just what's the current situation? Give us a few headliners on what you're seeing happening at the moment. And we're going to spend quite some time today talking about the ways forward, the options, your ideas, from your various experiences in the industry globally. So maybe, Des, I mind starting with you. Perhaps you can set us the scene and give us a bit of an overview from your perspective as to where air cargo is at currently and what's some of the big issues.
Well, Kim, just before I retired, I filled a job as the global head of cargo at IATA. And it probably was a fitting way to end the career, because at IATA, my prime job was trying to ensure that everybody knew the value of air cargo that didn't work within the industry of air cargo. And, you know, the attention we tried to draw was aimed at particularly politicians, particularly at the financial institutions, particularly at our passenger colleagues and airline heads, just so that they understood the real value air cargo had, not just on the industry, but on the fact that this beloved supply chain of ours helped to sustain human life other than acting as a catalyst for world trade. Now, since the pandemic, of course, despite everything that's happened and what we're seeing, the sadness and the sorrow of every human life that's being lost, and the destruction of the economies around the world and industries around the world, of course, our industry has taken a huge, huge toll in that. But the bright side, if there is such a thing, has been how air cargo has come to the salvation of so many around the world, and how it's brought respite and helped to bring care and attention and medical treatment. Because without air cargo, you couldn't have had the number of survivors that have emerged through this pandemic. And so finally, I'd like to think that somebody is recognizing the importance of our supply chain amidst the catastrophic impact that aviation has suffered through this. And I have, obviously, like most people, cause for some concern as to what's going to emerge post this period. But when you think, you've lost somewhere in the region of 4.5 million flights thus far till the end of June that would have been flying, then the effect on that on air cargo has been catastrophic.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Des. That's very, very salient words as to what's going on at the moment. And, we certainly pass on our regards to all of the staff and all of the executives and staff right across the entire industry, because we know these are very difficult times for aviation in general and including air cargo. Stan, perhaps you can give us a bit of an entree as well in terms of where you see things at the moment and just in general terms, the state of the air cargo industry. I obviously have a lot of discussion I want to have with you gentlemen today, but just a scene setter from you, Stan, as to where things are at currently.
Well, like you can't help but wonder sometimes about how we missed the ball on a lot of things. I mean, the deficiencies that are inherent in the system have been exposed, really badly. If you look at what's happening in China with the tremendous backlogs in the airports, the inability to get trucks into the airport, things like that are showing that, things like e-freight, which we should have been embarking on many, many years ago, just weren't picked up and they're not there. The system isn't geared to what's going on at the moment. That's the first thing. Things like COVID and paper handling, for example. Paper is a great conduit for the disease. Things like the digitization and e-commerce. It's a shame we didn't have that in place like we should have years ago. That's one thing, one deficiency that's been highlighted. But the other thing is what's because we talk a lot to the actual importers and exporters, the beneficial owners of the cargo. And what they've told me is that what's really scaring them is all of their lean production and just-in-time philosophies and everything else are going to have to go out the window in the future. And what's going to become the new normal in air cargo as a consequence of what's happening will depend on the security of the supply chain. And the air supply chain, they now understand how critical it was. So I think there's going to be a complete rethinking. Airports are going to have to look at cargo not as a real estate transaction in the future if they want to support their customer base. The airlines themselves, they're going to be faced with new challenges with international tourism, surely going to be the last thing that comes back. And when you talk about Rolls-Royce the other day, for example, saying they're laying off 9,000 people because the manufacturers are saying 3 to 5 years before the recovery comes. I tend to think that Rolls-Royce and Boeing and Airbus, when they're talking together, probably are more looking with a less filtered eye on what's going to happen. And when they say 3 to 5 years, I tend to believe it versus maybe an airline who wants to be optimistic and keep everybody's mood up. If we're really looking at 3 to 5 years in supply chain logistics and air cargo, we've got to look at a new business model, not a new business plan.
Okay. Thanks, Stan. Ram, you're the DSV for Emirates for 20 years. Very well known around the world as well as the other gentleman here. You've got still got a lot of connections right across the industry. What's your take on where we're at before I go into a round of discussion around how we move forward, what the options are and what the Brains Trust has got for us?
Sure enough, Clem. In fact, I was there for almost 28 years in Emirates, and have had the opportunity to see several of these kind of crises, and it was always crisis management. I mean, usually in our business, we are mostly in crisis management, and we actually excel in cases, in situations like this. If you look at the the air cargo industry in itself. In fact, I mean, when I say air cargo, I should be saying cargo industry as a whole. They tend to come in on its own when the chips are down. A thing like a pandemic or earthquake somewhere or some kind of calamities, that's where, the logistics industry really comes into its own and tries to support the frontliners who are trying to manage the business. Our hearts go out to all the people in the medical field, who are actually risking their life in trying to save the humankind. But they wouldn't be able to do what they are doing unless the unsung heroes in the logistics industry actually back them up. So it's always the cargo industry is there in the background, but people don't tend to recognize that they are there. But in a pandemic situation like this, the air cargo industry and the other logistics elements which go on to support the transportation chain or come into own, they tend to fall off the cliff when the economy sort of collapses, like in 2008, 2009, etc. But today, the situation is that a lot of capacity has been taken off the market because the passenger side of the business, in fact, aviation has been brought down to its knees. That has, of course, affected the air cargo side of the business. Those who have freighters, they are doing pretty well in supporting the industry in itself. But however, you can see the ingenuity of the industry in itself. They have now commissioned the passenger airplanes in hauling cargo. So taking off some of that shortage of capacity by creating these passenger airplanes to support the freighters operating around the network. So all in all, the total volume of cargo in the world has shrunk, but so has the capacity. At the moment, we are seeing that the supply and demand equation is slightly off in favor of demand. So the air cargo industry right now is trying its best to support whatever they can, the entire the world economy as such. And it will continue to do that for the next couple of years, or at least for 3 to 4 years. We are going to see that the air cargo is going to be the backbone of the aviation industry in itself. As passengers tend to come back slowly, they are all going to rely more on air cargo. The danger is, of course, as the airlines are shrinking, and I hope they don't take away a large number of the wide-body cargo-friendly airplanes off the market. But all in all, I think the air cargo industry within the aviation industry is in much better shape than the airlines themselves.
Okay. Thanks, Ram. I wanted to throw to you, Des, and then to each of you for a pretty short, sharp answer to this one, because a lot of us hear and see in the media all the time about government bailouts for airlines around the world at the moment. In Australia at the moment, Virgin is in administration. There's many examples of this. There's surprisingly about 18 different parties were wanting to bid initially to get into the data room on Virgin. I think there are 3 parties at the moment, down to the final 3 this week, for another week or so before they make a decision, before there's some issues around liquidity. And 2 of those bidders are from organisations that are already in the airline aviation industry. So interestingly, not for the faint-hearted, but for the educated to come in and look to these rescue missions and invest. So Des, back to you. What's your view, just very briefly, on the government bailouts? Are they a good idea? Are they causing false economies? Are they something that's absolutely needed because of the essential nature of this industry? Let us know what you think.
Well, my point is quite simple, Kim. all the airlines once upon a time were nationalized institutions. Okay, and after deregulation, they started to come out of that and became private enterprises, some of them. But one thing that never, ever left was national pride about having your own airline. And I think a lot of nations did not want to see anything but anything negative happen to their national flag carrier. So despite the fact that you've had rules around fair trade and rules around and antitrust rules particularly, but more importantly, you've had EU rules about cross subsidies and state subsidies, you're finding that there has been ongoing subsidies of one description or another all round and throughout the last 10, 20 years. And as we go through one crisis, it's happened. So, I'm not surprised that that's occurred. But despite the fact that you're throwing sometimes good money over bad, I think you will find that that those airlines that can emerge and emerge profitably and efficiently will survive. And no matter how much state aid is thrown into some of the others, it isn't going to help keep them afloat or at bay for too much longer in the future.
Stan, you've had experiences as a senior executive with a number of airlines over the years. What are your views on this? Government input or not?
Well, the interesting thing is when I was working with KLM, 32 years I put in there, we prided ourselves on the fact that we were independent and we were run like an entrepreneurial business, and the government didn't interfere in anything. As a matter of fact, with Martinair as a competitor at the time, anytime we would say anything, they would say, go solve it yourself, don't involve us. I've always been against state aid in airlines, going back many years ago. Because quite frankly, it pollutes the whole environment. The problem we have is bilateral rules. All the rules of the last 40, 50 years have allowed a lot of things to happen that shouldn't happen. It's just, there's no getting around it. But when we had the first hints of this coronavirus epidemic going where it went, the U.S. started the ball rolling with a $50 billion bailout, they called it, or a grant, whatever it might turn out to be, to three of the most profitable airlines in the world. And now I can sit here on the border with the U.S. and say Air Canada is not a state-run airline. It's definitely not. We have WestJet and we have a few other airlines up here in Canada. What are we going to do when this post-pandemic world comes? If we find out because of state aid that was given to KLM Air France, for example, that the national carrier of Canada is going to become United, American, or Delta, or KLM or Air France because Air Canada is gone because the government didn't help it. So I'm against it, but I'm for it when it has to be used to bring a level playing field to everything. There are certain things that I don't like about not giving state aid, and one of them is the loss of talent. People are going to be forced to leave the company because of the economic position that the airline is put into without state aid, and you're going to lose a lot of good people. And normally it's the people who can find a job somewhere else or who are the best people who leave. It's not the ones that maybe should leave or if you had a choice would leave. It's just wrong, in my opinion, to do anything but not support your airline. In the case of Air France KLM, basically prior to this, 30% of the joint shares were owned by the Dutch and the French government. So, I mean, they have a vested interest in putting, I think you've added up 10 billion into Air France and probably 7 or 10 that's going to go into KLM. They own part of the shares. Lufthansa just announced a $10 billion, 7 or 8 billion euro subsidy to Lufthansa. But at the same time, they took a 20% equity stake in Lufthansa. Now, that is completely polluting the future market positioning of these airlines if they have access to this money. So, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't.
Okay, well, thanks for that roundup and that summation. Ram, your point of view. You've been with Emirates for nearly 30 years, and Emirates is the pride of Dubai. And so, what's your view on the support they're receiving?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Stan and Des have spoken quite well about their views, and what I want to add on is, well, I'm not a great fan of subsidies. We have never, as long as I was there, the Emirates was never subsidized. It's hard to go out and fight in the market. And what competition does is it actually allows you to become better than others. And competition is also beneficial to the market in general for the consumers. Having said that, it is a situation. We are in a situation where the entire world has come to a grinding halt. Just not the aviation industry, but the world in itself. The world, commerce and trade and tourism all revolve around connectivity. You let the airlines go down, and the world comes to a grinding halt. That's the reality of the situation. And in a situation like that, any kind of help that an airline which connects people around the world can get to help stand up is a good thing. Whether it should be given as a subsidy or whether it's given as a kind of a loan which has to be paid back, I would rather prefer the latter, so that it becomes a level playing field. It's interesting. The very people who were complaining that some of the Gulf carriers are being subsidized are the first one out there to receive those subsidies, and of which a lot of that might not be returned back to the government. So it's an interesting situation that we are all in. But the survival of the airlines is very critical to the world.
Thanks, Ram. We've heard a lot about the way that the various players in the industry around air cargo, so aviation sector in particular, but specifically around the air freight organisations, ground handling organisations, airports, the infrastructure holders and owners are going to need to relook and remap how the industry is going to function moving forward. And I know, Stan, SASI, your organisation has recently published a couple of white papers, one of which has a number of opinions around this particular issue. Go back to you, Des. You as the head of cargo for IATA for a number of years, for over 10 years, I think, you've worked with all of these players in the market for many years throughout your career, not just from being an IATA. What's your big picture? And again, we'll try and keep this brief because there's so much content I really want to talk about with you, gentlemen. Give me a brief overhead of what you think the big ticket items are for all of the players moving forward to how they need to operate.
I'll try and keep it brief, Kim, because I think you're right. To try and shorten the outlook. Look, the air cargo supply chain is, as you know, it works on the basis of collaboration between 5-6 entities, and you've named them all in your preamble. So when you look at whether you're an airline, a forwarder, a ground handler, a trucker, a customs agent, a broker, then you've got the shipper and the consignee at the other end. Then you look at what connects all those dots, right? The actual supply chain. The way we look at it is that air cargo is going to have to become completely integrated. And you're going to have to, in order to get the efficiency in the supply chain, you're going to have to eliminate a lot of what I call the cost-bearing activities and actions that took place hitherto. And in order to simplify that entire process, because to gain efficiency, what you're effectively offering is a reduction in time for the end-to-end supply chain. In order for that to happen, it's completely digitized. In order for that to happen, you've got to eliminate countless duplication of tasks. And that's in the handling process as well as in the paper process. And so when you look at everything that's going to evolve, I believe it won't have to wait long. And I honestly believe it will come in the next 2 to 3 years. A lot of those steps will be removed and they'll become far more integrated in the process. And that's going to happen, and that has to happen.
Dan?
Okay, well, this is a 3-year-old story, 4-year-old story for me, because I've been preaching to sometimes the converted, but most likely people who are just oblivious to the fact that they're still living with a business model that's 40 years old, and they still think that they can do it. We work in a system of silos, unfortunately, be it in industry associations, be it in training, be it in the way we handle a business. A lot of the models of the past were based on a complete lack of transparency, which of course, in that lack of transparency, there was ability to make a margin on the difference between buy and sell and live on it. And sometimes, the tactics that were used in order to keep that model going, were pretty vicious between all those silos. The freight forwarders and IATA, for example, starting lawsuits with each other over things. The naming of a freight forwarder as an agent of an airline, which has never been the case for many, many years, but they still cling to that and use it as an excuse, for example, to have a relationship. The biggest thing for me is the fact that they talk today a lot in the press about passenger bubbles. Well, the terminology that we've been pushing for years is data logistics corridors. When you start looking at a data logistic corridor for air cargo stakeholders, for the beneficial owners of the cargo, the shippers, the importers, what you start looking at is a system that is so easy to replicate in a virtual way versus what the integrators do. I mean, we could solve half of our problems if we just, as a scheduled air cargo industry, if we just looked at what was being done by the integrators today. I mean, just move to that and automatically we would help a lot of how we do it. Now, how do we go about it? We engage partners in the industry in the various sectors that Des spoke about. And if those partners want to join in making that data logistic corridor possible for a shipper or an importer, fine. If they don't, they'll have to leave. I'm a big believer in there's 99.9% of the success that we can have in the future is going to be based on what happens on the ground. A 777 of Cathay Pacific departing Hong Kong, or a British Airways 777 departing Hong Kong and arriving in Heathrow, the aluminum's the same. It's what you do with it when it gets on the ground at both ends or leaves. And that's where the mistakes are being made by the scheduled cargo industry. They don't even understand the value of the product they own. And that goes right up to the professionalism of the cargo management and ability to get that message up to the C-suite, the CFO, the CEO. And I think that that's something that when I talked about before, when I said that the business model has to change, it's not simply redoing your business plan. It's the whole model of how scheduled airlines can absolutely do a much better job and a more profitable job in the future if they just take a look at what's possible.
Thanks, Stan. So, Ram, we're hearing from Stan and from Des about pretty much new blueprints, not just filling around the edges and tweaking things here. We're talking about fairly major radical rationalisation, restructuring and recalibration of the way business is being done. It's fairly significant. Your perspective?
Yeah, I think Des alluded to that. I mean, the digitization has become so important. I mean, the change is going to be forced on this industry. There are several elements involved in the supply chain in itself. Right now, there's a lot of, trying to make a buck out of each other, a kind of attitude, which doesn't really work because, what Des and Stan talked about, a seamless integration. And integration has got to be based on processes and remuneration based on services rendered, rather than, trying to make a buck out of each other. So, in fact, if we throw away the labels of freight forwarders, the airlines, the handling agents, whatever it is, and just say, have a simple kind of a relationship, contractor and supplier. Just contractor and supplier. And you become a chain. It doesn't matter where the contact point is. Wherever the contact is, they become the contractor, everybody else becomes a supplier. So it's kind of an interchangeable rule. And the only way we can achieve that is by digitization. And if you look at the e-commerce, they are probably driving the change, and they are driving such a change in such a way that even the integrators sometimes struggle to keep pace with that. So what we are now looking at is creating a marketplace. And within the marketplace, if you look at Amazon, for example, they have created this platform. And people say Amazon is an IT company rather than a e-commerce retailer. But they are all of the above. What they have done is they have presented a platform, a front end to the customer, with the choice of what's available. And once the customer clicks, everything back end starts happening, and they are so integrated that all those people who need to be involved in transportation of that parcel, or that package, or wherever it's coming from and wherever it's going to start happening. There's no branding out there. The branding is Amazon up there, the front end. And there are airlines involved, there are freight forwarders involved, there are facilitation centers involved, there are ground handling agents involved, but that's all transparent to the end customer. So we need to have a platform like that in front of us. And there are people like Freightos, people like Cargo.one, who are creating that platform, and probably they are the ones who are going to help the air cargo industry evolve. But to get there, they have to embrace digitization. We started the e-freight process in 2004. 16 years later, we are nowhere close to where we want to be. So now this whole COVID-19 situation is changing the dynamics of the way that the world will operate in the future. So if you want to be in the future, you have to change. You have to digitize yourself. And digitization is just not only in the air cargo industry. Digitization is happening in our daily life. This has also forced people to stay home and work from home. That is a part of digitization. We have now created digital workplace. So it should be easy for us now to make that transition in the air cargo industry, to bring that transition, apply what they are doing in their personal life to their business life. And the integration has got to be very, very seamless. We should be working at a collective efficiency rather than at the individual level. Individual level, you might be very, very efficient, but your efficiency can actually add on inefficiency to the next element in the supply chain. And then what they do is, if everybody starts becoming efficient on their own, you actually integrate inefficiency and make inefficiency more inefficient. So you have to actually look at the overall supply chain and see what needs to be done and keep it simple, and digitization gives you that capability to simply create that transparency so everybody is on the same page. You take the complexity out of the business, and this is why I call this now an acceleration of evolution. Those who change, those who will evolve, will survive. Those who don't, they'll be extinct.
Thanks, Ram. I hear you all talking about the need for this change and for digitisation. Many organisations are well and truly on that journey. A lot of them aren't. But it seems clear from all of you that you see digitisation of the supply chain as being very important. Recent days, we've heard just a little bit of a sidebar issue perhaps, but I'd like a quick input from each of you on this. We've heard about Microsoft and FedEx joining forces, arguably to compete with Amazon and Alibaba and whoever else. Des, your reflections, any comments at all on that move? A good move? Was it due to take place, or is it a catch-up move? What's your view?
No. I think it's a good move. Look, the more and the bigger the technology companies that gets into collaborative mode with even we're talking about the big IT companies that are in our space. So much the better. So I tend to welcome any form of closer collaboration and integration. Everything that drives enhanced values, enhanced reach and efficiency. And what it also helps to do in time is to drive down costs. We've got, just to give you a very, very quick example, Kim, we have in our industry something bordering on 40 to 50 different IT suppliers, all trying to provide a service of connectivity for messaging between all these supply chain players. Can you imagine that? Now, every time you try to link a message, there's a cost element to that message. That cost is unknown to any operator, any airline CEO to this day. So when you take a look at if you can eliminate all of that nonsense today, that's just one small part of streamlining our supply chain and making it digitally more efficient. Then you take into account real estate prices for running cargo terminals on airport. Huge real estate price. And then, of course, what they're doing is replicating what was done off airport by the logistics player. So, the whole element, and I'm slightly digressing to your question, but I think that the greater the involvement of the big providers of technology solutions and services into our industry, the better.
Stan, your view? Just a reflection on the Microsoft FedEx one first, and then maybe the bigger picture.
I think that there's a bigger play than what Amazon's doing in logistics between Microsoft and Amazon. I mean, Amazon is the biggest supplier of IT to the U.S. military, as an example. So there's a much bigger play there than just what we're talking about in supply chain logistics. And I don't think the fact of Huawei and what's going on in the U.S. And the political implications of things are not in the background of all this as well. So I'm always a bit suspect when we get announcements like this and how it's really going to change my day to day in the coming weeks. Google, for example, Amazon, the players are big players. And Microsoft is a supplier and a player. But I mean, I would suspect there's a bigger play in the background than just what we're talking about day to day. Should there be 50 people out there trying to supply a new way of rewriting the world? I agree with Des. It's just ludicrous. If you look on a macro sense, we're into the fifth stage, I believe, of digitization, shall we say, in our life. I mean, who today would think that a 5-year-old kid is walking around with an iPhone that has more computing power and everything else than what the first space shuttle had? Yet we're still talking about the first cycle in air cargo about how we handle digitization. I mean, some legacy systems, ground handling companies that have to have 5 computer terminals because each airline doesn't want to have a common one, et cetera, et cetera. We're still in the bush leagues when it comes to scheduled airlines. I mean, it really is. So, it's just ridiculous in my mind that we can't, for example, get the airports and the airlines and the GHAs, the ground handling agents, to understand that if they provided a seamless service and somehow agreeing amongst those three entities that they alone are the ones who can really make digitization happen. If an airport says to a company that wants to build a new modern cargo terminal, I'm only interested in concession fees and the rent you're going to pay me, well, that warehouse is not going to become a marketing tool if it's not fully digitized for the future, but they don't understand that. Likewise, airlines, if they're trying to develop a product portfolio. The product portfolio is fine in your hub if you have digitization to your standards, but, there are spokes involved in every hub. So what goes in has to come out in just as good a condition and again, speed, transparency, and quality. You don't want claims. You don't want it if it's going through a hub to sit there for 6 hours, and you don't want the customer to say that if I use FedEx or UPS, I can see where it is at any time. I can know what the temperature is. I can check on my tilt meter. If I use your competitors, why can't I do it with you? Well, you can only do it if, like these two gentlemen just said, we agree on something, on a way of talking to each other digitally so that a seamless offering can be made to the people who want to still use air cargo. And that's an important point, I think. What air cargo is going to exist in the future. The people that still want to use it are absolutely going to want to use it because they need to have it. And if they need to have it, and your competitor is going to be Amazon, Alibaba, who control, between Amazon and DHL, be it taking airplanes from Atlas, Khalida, and all the rest of it, probably are going to control 60-70% of the world air freighter fleet in the future. So how's a scheduled airline going to compete if they don't even embark on something as simple of getting out of the first generation of digitization and moving forward? I was at that meeting in 2004 that Ram was talking about, and I think it was in Kuala Lumpur, if I remember correctly. Lisbon, yeah. And it was an afterthought of the Director General of IATA, who was mandated to have something to talk about. And they said, oh, yeah, let's do e-freight. I mean, it's just ridiculous that today they're bragging about we're handling e-airway bills. Well, gentlemen, the first e-airway bill was transmitted in Canada in 1988. 1988, the first e-airway bill facility system was available. And I still remember the name of the guy and working on the project. And today we're bragging because 60% of the world is using an e-airway bill. We've got to get out of the dark ages.
Des, prior to the end, up till the end of last year, and since this pandemic hit us, there was a lot of move around not just the air cargo space, but shipping and across the broader supply chain of more companies, some of the bigger organizations globally with infrastructure, asset heavy, looking to flex their muscles and control more of the supply chain, if you like, across the type of Amazon or Alibaba model, right from upstream supply chain all the way down through integration and down to the downstream supply chain all the way through the last mile. Do you think that the pandemic has had any major effect on that trend, or will that trend continue?
Kim, for me, that trend is going to stay. I think anybody that's has size and reach is going to want to continue to extend that reach and extend that size. I think what they're going to be able to do in future is just do it a little bit smarter. And you've got to learn. You've got to learn by some mistakes that sometimes bigger is not best, and if you've got a size of ship, it's no point building an even bigger ship and an even bigger ship when there's such a surplus of capacity existing at that time, just because you think you can start to take a more dominant share of the marketplace. I think what you've got to do, you can grow in size, but you've got to grow not just in terms of your capacity to provide, but you've got to do things a lot more efficiently. I'll just give you an example. We're going through a complete, you know what they say about what goes around comes around? When the industry started, our industry started, we started carrying small parcels because we had small airplanes. Then we got bigger airplanes like the 747, so we went into bigger commodities, etc., and so forth. What we never invested in at any time was in our technology. So we carried on with this size, meant everything. And then, of course, people realized we were so goddamn inefficient. They invested in areas of technology to provide an end-to-end tracking. And, of course, guess what? We lost all the small end and high-yielding elements of our business, okay, to this new breed called the integrators. Now, isn't it uncanny that you take a 30-year cycle or a 40-year cycle, and guess what the world of tomorrow is going to be? It's this small parcels returning in the form of e-commerce that everybody wants to get back into. And so now size isn't the matter. It's about the ability to lift, but to do it efficiently. So that to me is what's going to drive the need to invest. And there's no such thing as a free lunch. And if you want to be able to gain all the efficiencies and you want to be able to gain that end-to-end control and the ability to give transparency to everybody that interacts with you, from the beginner to from the shipper to the consignee, or the seller to the buyer, then you're going to have to provide that. So to me, I think if you're big, they'll continue to want to stay big because they believe that's the way to remain dominant. But I think if you are small and you've got agility and you've got efficiency, there's room for you to survive.
Well, a couple of things. On the forwarding side, it was interesting. About 2 years ago, excuse me, about 2 years ago, I spent some time on the road on behalf of one of the major airlines because they were looking to get some independent opinion on where the market was going. And I was talking to a lot of freight forwarders, and they said that they were in the biggest dilemma of their life, trying to understand how to handle e-commerce. And it was decimating their margins and yields, because basically, if you can move something on e-commerce with complete transparency, well, that complete transparency also exposed the pricing that was possible in order to move goods from A to B. So what happened is the freight forwarders were telling me that whereas before they were able to make fantastic margins on consolidations, and consolidations used to take 6-8 days to get delivered airport to airport, the famous studies that went on at the time. E-commerce operators were offering 2 to 3 days service for roughly the same price as a consolidation. So they wondered how to adapt to that. The second thing they said was that they had invested in infrastructure. That infrastructure had to be fed. So the only way then to get back to making a profitable return on investment was to increase scale. Hence, you get a lot of consolidation in the freight forwarding industry. The DSVs buying Panalpina and other companies, as an example. So size doesn't necessarily mean that the business case is driven by anything that's beneficial to the exporter or importer. It's basically a survival mode by these companies and how they're going to grow. The guys that are the smaller people are facing a problem because they can't afford the digitization and the systems that they need in order to compete with Amazon and Alibaba and JD.com and all the rest of them, Lazada, you name them. There's, I think, 110,000 individual outlets that sell e-commerce. So how do they compete with them if they don't have the capital that these big guys have? That's another dilemma for them. The third thing is the integrators. When we did some work with the integrators recently, they had the system, but it was a closed loop system. And what happened is all of a sudden they realized that they were in the B2B business, 9 to 5, 5 days a week. I come by 3 o'clock and pick up your goods, and at 3:02, if you're not ready, I leave, and you have no choice but to accept that. And because it's a completely closed loop system, you pay my costs. Therefore, it's totally justified, shall we say, $90 to move an envelope on a flight between, let's say, London and New York. So they got away with that for a while, but the B2C and B2B business is 5 times bigger than B2C. B2B customers started saying, I'm not going to give it to you anymore because I can give it to Amazon or DHL Express and I can get it there cheaper and faster. So a lot of things on size of the organization, these big boys have got to reevaluate their business model as well. We going back to what Des said, and Ram as well, Des in the past, we went through 3 phases in the past that caused us. I remember when I was in KLM, when I was running Asia, we used to have 125 to 150 airway bills on a 747 leaving Hong Kong, going back to Canada, back to Amsterdam. By the time I left KLM, about 6 years later, we were down to about 8 to 10 airway bills because consolidation had taken it away. Now, it's not just the integrators took it away. We lost the small packages to consolidation from the freight forwarders. We lost the small packages and high yield to the integrators. So we had 2 people attacking our business model, and we did nothing about it. The only reason consolidation ever became the money the return that it gave to the freight forwarders was because in the brilliance of IATA one day sitting around, we said we could save handling costs if we introduced a pallet program. That's the kind of silliness that went on at the time with people who, I must say, at the time, I was part of it, but not in a decision-making position. But that was the whole driver behind palletization, close down the handling at the airport and save money. So, we've made a lot of mistakes in the past, and now we're going to make another one if we don't change the way we do business. It's as simple as that. Air Canada, Swiss, British Airways, Lufthansa, without cargo contribution on their passenger flights in the past couple of years, with passenger yields, you could fly from the west coast of the United States to China for $750 return. Now, without cargo contribution, they couldn't make money in the past. Just imagine what's going to happen in the future, like Ram said, if they don't take cargo more seriously. Size isn't the solution. Value is the solution, not volume, value.
Thanks, Stan. Ram, just to wrap up this session, just briefly then, the question being this trend towards some of the bigger players looking to extend their control over the supply chain and hence supply and demand through the customer side. Has that changed as a result of the pandemic, or is that, as Des said, is that trend going to continue?
Some of them are going to continue, but you need to look at the bigger picture of what is happening. Forget about the big and the small operators, etc. Let's now look at what's likely to happen to the market. Now, this COVID-19 has exposed a few dependencies that the world has suddenly begun to realize, that the entire world was depending on one country to produce most of their items, whether it's industrial or consumer items or whatever it is. Now, that is going to create, a lot of the countries are now saying, right, now we can't have this kind of dependency on one area or one country or one region, because anything like a pandemic like this brings everything to a grinding halt. So what is going to happen in the medium to longer term is that there is going to be a lot of nearshoring and reshoring activity that's going to go on. So you might have large airplanes at the moment, are dedicated on China to the world routing, but suddenly, you're going to see in about 5 to 6 years' time, that's going to change because the traditional supply chain operations are going to change. So what happens then? So that is what we need to start working towards. And people like DHL, people like Schenker's, etc., they are already ahead of the game as a multinational in the forwarding industry. They're looking at all those things. But as airlines, we are, now there are 2 segments of capacity that comes into the market. One is via the passenger bellies. The other one is the freighters. The freighters are more like conveyor belts. We can actually very, very quickly change them wherever we want, whereas the passenger capacity is generally fixed. So it's a question of now us looking at how best can we synchronize the conveyor belt operation versus fixed operation to deal with the kind of stuff that's going on. Both Stan and Des alluded to me. Now we're going back into the smaller parcels type of traffic. Now let's look at the bigger picture. The traditional cargo, the traditional supply chain, the growth is in lower single digit. The only thing that is actually growing in double digits is the e-commerce. And that, I think, will continue to drive the growth of our business. So for the consolidations that Stan was talking about, that is going to be a part of the history. Look, we haven't yet seen technology really coming into play here. We have the 3D printing that could come into play. That is coming up. The best analogy I can give you is 70s and 80s, and before that, we used to have newspapers being printed, edited, published in one place, and transported to various places. Some people got it overnight, some people got it in 2 days, some people got it in the evenings. Now we are in a situation, an industrial application of 3D printing is just on our doorsteps at the moment, which means you can centrally design a product and print it locally anywhere in the world, just like the newspapers today. And the Financial Times, for example, printed, edited and published in London, now printed in, Canada, can now add on a couple of local pages of news, local Canadian news. So that actually increases in value of what Financial Times is doing. And that is what the 3D printing is going to do to our business. So what happens to the regular supply chain? Every little item that you take, the mouse has got, 15 different parts there, and that's 15 different supply chains operating in crisscrossing across the world to be assembled somewhere. But in a 3D printing, it could be just one piece printed totally. So those are the things that our industry should be thinking about. How do we manage and how do we have the right capacity at the right place at the right time? Now, right capacity is very, very critical. If you have overcapacity, then you're shooting yourself in your pocket, in your feet, because at the end of the day, competition will dictate what you can charge for, and that means like what had happened in the last few years, the airlines were not making money. You have this extremely capital-intensive asset, but your returns were dictated by the market. That has changed for the next 3 to 4 years' time. Although the volumes of cargo is also shrinking, but so has the capacity. But that will keep the cargo rates, because the demand is going to be higher than the supply at a pace, and that is a good time for this industry to be able to now look forward and invest into the future in right-sizing the capacity, right-sizing the operation, digitization of the operation, which will add capacity. There's another thing that's happening in the next 3-4 years. Any company or any country, companies are laden with debts. Countries are, their coffers are getting empty because they're supporting the economy. So they have to recoup all these revenues or money or whatever you call it. The only way you can do that is to become more cost efficient, because at the end of the day, consumer can only afford X amount of pricing. And within that, how best can you survive, repay your debts, at the same time be able to invest in new so that you can evolve into the next stage.
Well, thanks, Ram. And with that, I'm going to wrap up today's session. We've had some extremely erudite commentary uniquely experienced insight, opinions and views from all of you. Des Vertannes, former head of cargo for IATA, Stan Wraight from SASI, in a number of senior airline roles over the years, and ran nearly the magic 30 years with SkyCargo. To you all, thank you for today's contribution. We respect the value of your time as we do with our audience. Thank you to our audience for joining us. I'm sure you gentlemen will pass on my regards and respect to everybody who has performed fantastically throughout the last few months in the air cargo space to support what has been happening globally, both from a government and a private sector perspective. To all of the players, to everybody, and not the least of which is all of the broader healthcare and first responder workers right throughout the world during this period. So thank you all again, gentlemen.
Yes.
Thank you, Des, thank you, Ram, thank you, Stan.
Thank you, Kim.
And we look forward to joining you with another session as well, because we have a series lined up. Thanks.
Oh, there's much more. There's much more to talk about.
All right. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Ram. Good to see you, Stan.
See you guys. Yeah.